children, I'll tell you the news. Don't worry about the names or dates, you already know it's true. Your doctor hates your baby, the prime minister's a ghost, and all them folks are sailing here 'cause they're in love with boats. Superfoods can save us from all our evil sin. JFK and Elvis own a bar in Wisconsin. And vaccinations were created by the CIA to steal votes from Bernie Sanders and turn your babies gay. So click the link you think you like and get tooled for a fight against those lefty fascist communists who are leaning too far right.
Hi, Jerry here. Before we get into the show, just a quick reminder that you can follow us on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, at PGMcast. You can have a look at our website, which is notanotherfakenewscast.com. You can email us if you've got anything you want to get in touch with us about. Our email address is info@notanotherfakenewscast.com. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast, write us a review on iTunes, and just keep spreading the word about what we're doing here. So without further ado, let's get into the episode.
Hi, and welcome to Not Another Fake Newscast. I'm Paul.
And I'm Jerry, and we're here today with the elusive Shahmir Sanni. Shahmir is most famous for being a high-profile whistleblower against the electoral fraud committed by the Vote Leave campaign in the 2016 referendum, coming forward with his evidence that led to him being publicly outed for his homosexuality by Downing Street, and wrongfully dismissed from his role with the Taxpayers Alliance. At the time, Boris Johnson was the Foreign Secretary and called his claims utterly ludicrous, but the Electoral Commission ultimately found Vote Leave guilty of breaking electoral law. Shahmir, thanks for taking the time to come and speak to us.
And thank you for having me.
I guess the last time we saw you, we managed to persuade you to try Buckfast for the first time in a field somewhere down in Sussex. So it's a little bit different this time around.
Yeah, I barely remember that weekend.
We're all in the same boat there.
Yeah.
That was good fun. I would be very happy to be back there right now rather than being cooped up in the house.
In the field.
Yeah, in a field, like the thing is, if we could be there this August, it would be amazing. But it's certainly not going ahead this year. Hopefully next year we'll all be back down there again.
Yeah.
So, I guess the first question would kind of relate to your initial whistleblowing and the sort of outcome of that. When Downing Street chose to out you publicly as for your homosexuality, was that a massive shock and surprise to you?
No. Yeah. I've sort of, it's still something that I kind of have to kind of take a big breath before I talk about, because it was such a whirlwind, because it wasn't just me being outed, it was me being fired a few weeks later, and then me having to deal with whatever comes with being a whistleblower, as particularly a whistleblower against, two future prime ministers and 2 future cabinets and the entire advisor, then all the advisors of the last 2 conservative governments and 1 conservative government before that. So for me, that was kind of the most personal trauma that I faced for whistleblowing. And
yeah,
I think there were so many different attacks coming at me that I don't think I've even yet come to terms or understood how that impacted me. Like, I've talked about it and I've interviewed about it a lot, and people always sort of assume that, this was that one tragic outing, like this happened to this guy, that he was outed. And I kind of have to go, that was one of many knives that were kind of lurched into my chest from the government at the time and now. And I kind of, I don't know, when I talk about it, I used to always talk about, it's hard to be, of course it's hard to be outed, and it's when you're Muslim and Pakistani and when homosexuality is so taboo in your culture, it's an incredibly difficult thing to come out irregardless of being outed. That in itself is such a traumatic experience. Even if you consciously, willingly come out, that in itself is traumatic. It's it can be extremely violent, and even if your family is supportive, the ramifications of being a homosexual Muslim man in a society that is so inherently Islamophobic, and also transphobic, and still is adjusting to difference from cisgendered straight white male people as the norm. And I think I never really had time to fully grasp the violence of what happened. At the time, it was very much an emotional reaction to just having my entire life be so viciously attacked, and not just my work, but who I was and my beliefs. I always say that I was, just as much as I was outed, I was repeatedly reminded of my race, my religion, there was incredible, all the language that was used around me post outing and when I was outed or when I came forward was so racialized and so inherently rooted in sort of this Islamophobia that has permeated within the United Kingdom for a long time. It was almost like some of the things when people would constantly go, he lacks integrity, or he lacks honesty, and they would specifically use these words of these so-called evidence or a so-called truth, and they would constantly revert back to this idea that I was that I lacked integrity. And I had to kind of go back, and I read books about whistleblowing and former whistleblowers, and even alongside Christopher Wiley, who's my best friend, there was never calls of someone lacking integrity. And I had to kind of adjust over the last few years. I've realized that actually, even when it came to Snowden and Chelsea Manning, yes, there would be calls that they were lying or that they were traitors, but there's this constant coded language that comes with this belief that Pakistanis are fraudulent, that Pakistanis Pakistanis have money laundering schemes, that they all live in the same house and take benefits. It's this, there's this reminder, and they would always associate that with the way that I looked. Guido Fawkes, Times Journal, Guido Fawkes, and all these right-wing journalists and politicos that I had that were sort of coming after me constantly would talk about the way that I looked and my lack of integrity. Like, it was always, he's just doing this for attention because look at the way that he looks.
Yeah, so it was like an implicit cultural stereotype. Yeah,
and I've never actually talked about this in this much detail, except with my friends, because a lot of the times people kind of go, "Oh, it's just because you were going after the government. Obviously, they're going to say you lack integrity. Obviously, they're going to say you're a liar." And I was like, "Okay, that's fine. Lying is fine, but there's the specific terms, the specific use of the word lacking integrity, or being a fraud."
It's
sorry,
a dog whistle almost. I was just going to say, like, it's almost like a dog whistle to a certain subset of our society as well, where, as you said, there is that the way that people view like Pakistani people as like fraudulent and stuff like that. I'm just using slight subversive text and through the media to be able to, because they can't say this man is a dodgy Pakistani, because that is offensive on every front.
So verbally racist.
That is overtly racist, yeah, but they can subvert it by using terminology that like paints a picture, if you will, and like you were having to come up against that pretty much all the time from every angle.
And
I guess,
well,
sorry, I guess at the same time as you were sort of whistleblowing, you were doing it alongside some other people who were not of your ethnic background and were not, the same language wasn't being used to describe them. So you had a very direct comparison there.
Yeah. And it's always, and even my outing in itself was racialized, right? I think people, I sort of go, they wouldn't have sort of used that as their big weapon if I wasn't a brown Muslim. And they wouldn't have used that if I was Pakistani. You know, that wouldn't be seen as that big a deal or a weapon against me that would help people doubt my integrity. And because like my being in a relationship with them, and the main argument was that I was in a relationship with one of the people that I had named. And I sort of I wasn't in a relationship with 15 of the other people that I was specifically naming. And so this obsession with my personal life was solely used because of my race, because of my background. And I have to explain that to people, that as horrible as it was, the violence that I faced from the press and this government was not based on my sexuality as much as it was based on my race. And so
do you think it was
well, I was going to say, I don't know, maybe in the same vein as you here, but was there do you think there was an intent to use that to turn a possible community support away from you? Essentially, like you're already being attacked from various angles because of the fact you're attacking the government or whatever. But by calling into question your sexuality, and as you've already stated, a community that is very, has lots of issues with sexuality anyway across the board, that like they can use that to turn the community against you, and they can use that to give you less of a safe space. I don't know if that's the right term to use, but essentially like give another group of people to hate on you for another reason.
Undermine your reputation within your own community.
It's interesting you say that, because I've spoken about this within my own circles within the LGBTQ community about how when I came forward, actually one of the first prominent figures, actually the first prominent politician to reach out to me was Saeeda Warsi, right? And Saeeda Warsi is someone who has a complicated relationship with the community, because she's very much respected by the South Asian community, but also most young South Asians and most South Asians also know that she's a conservative, and as most South Asians or Pakistanis and Bangladeshis vote Labour and are progressives or left wing. She's always had this weird relationship, but she was the only Pakistani politician to publicly support me. And I think that was also in line because Saeeda Warsi has been critiquing the conservative government for their Islamophobia and their the kind of extremists within the group who are all now in power that have completely opposed Saeeda Warsi and her kind of Cameron Light conservative clique. You know what I mean? And she was the only person. Otherwise, there was no Pakistani Labour politicians that reached out to me. There was no Muslim Labour politicians that reached out to me. And I essentially, from the community, from the Pakistani and from the Muslim community in Britain, which is a very large proportion of the minority community here, effectively I had no communication. I became the most prominent, and I say that, and I had this conversation with some friends of mine from America who were some pretty influential Pakistani politicos within the United States, and they were trying to understand this, and they were like, where was the backing of the community? And I said, the difference here is actually all the integral figures within the Pakistani community kind of didn't actually approach me or reach out to me, except barring Saeeda Warsi, Fatima Bhutto, and who's incredible in her own right. And I kind of had to explain to people that I don't know what the dynamics were, but there is, of course, when you are an elected official and you align yourself with someone that is so controversial, as much as I hate the word, it's understandable why they wouldn't. But I think that was my biggest source of upset, was the fact that I had not been engaged by my own community. And of course it had to do with sexuality. I don't deny that. There's no denying that. Of course, there's a huge homophobia problem within British, Pakistani, Bangladeshi communities, and that's not just a religious thing. That's actually, as much as it is a class issue and a socioeconomic issue, as it is a cultural, racial, or
for sure.
And I always sort of say this to people when they're like, well, you can't expect politicians to, Muslim politicians to reach out to you, or Labour politicians. And I sort of go, from every cabinet minister reached out to me and showed their support, yet except for the Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Muslim politicians, there was abject silence. Even the activists and the work they were doing, there was a lot of repressed resentment that my platform suddenly became so big. And I don't say this out of like there's people didn't like the fact that I had a platform. I think people were kind of confused as to how I, as a Pakistani man, I became the most prominent Pakistani political sort of face in Britain. And to not have the support of British Pakistanis or British Bangladeshis outright was entirely rooted in my sexuality. And I don't think once I had an argument about that with someone who was saying it wasn't because you were gay, it was because you were you had worked with the Conservatives. And I was like, but there are plenty of conservative Pakistani politicians who I know myself, being Pakistani, that have had resounding support from the community, that have worked with very influential figures within British politics, even in media, right? British Asian Network, all of these sort of Asian establishments within the UK, I had no contact from them. The communities that were contacting me were Black feminists, were the Black LGBTQ community, Black activists, Black politicians, like David Lammy, Don Butler, whoever. Like, these were the people that were actively showing support and engaging with what I was saying. And I think that was, a big. That was understood when I was outed, that was the weapon that they were using, as that they were outcasting me from.
It was a deliberate ploy from them, you think?
And it was effective. And I kind of, it's like me against a government. So like, I kind of have to go, okay, fine, fair play.
Well,
and the thing is, as you kind of touched on, the government that we have in power now, they're pretty much every component of that government made up the various groups that you were interacting with during the like Leave campaign and stuff like that. So you're now essentially, you're still not now one of the least popular people in Westminster still to this day, because in the grand scheme of things, nothing has changed, and the last run of leaders have all been people that you've been up against. Do you feel that might impact you still, like, so you're freelance and stuff like that at the present moment? Do you feel that you still might be you may still have a target on your head, shall we say, for London media groups and stuff similar like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's articles written about me every other month now. Before it used to be every other week, and a lot of the people that are now working or best friends with people within government are still having pieces written about the Electoral Commission of Vote Leave and all of this stuff. Like, just the other day, the Metropolitan Police said they weren't going to be investigating Darren Grimes and Alan Halsall, who was the name on Vote Leave's documents, any further.
Yeah.
And that was turned into this huge thing about, they won't ever mention my name. I will say this. They'll mention Carol Cadwallader. They'll mention Jolien. They'll mention my legal people. They'll mention every single person, but they won't ever say my name. And I find that really hilarious, because from the start, they've always gone so-called whistleblower. And even from Matthew Elliott's interview with Laura Koonsberg, they deliberately made that coordinated interview that they did a week before the Electoral Commission said that they were finding Vote Leave. they would always say so-called whistleblowers, and they would always use the specifically not say my name. And I've kind of joked about this so much with people, is that it's because if they know this, if they say my name, then they'll have to engage with me, and then realize that there's no grounds that they can stand on, and then they understand that actually they can't say anything. They can't actually say Shahmir Sanni is a liar, because I can straight up go, okay, fine, let's fight this in court.
Yeah,
and then
also let's look at the times when I have already won.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's look at the fact that the Electoral Commission found Vote Leave guilty of electoral fraud. The fact that you won your case against the Taxpayers Alliance for dismissal.
And I think the Taxpayers Alliance was a great example, because they, as I understand it, took pretty much, they were willing to take everything that you had claimed and take ownership of it and say, yes, we done all of those things that has been claimed against us to protect the fact. Essentially, they don't ever want to be going toe-to-toe or into another legal case with you again, because they have already admitted guilt for all the things you claimed you were guilty of, and they've got this very real danger that in the event they find themselves in court, they might have to start producing documents and information based on their funders that they don't want to touch.
Exactly. So just to sort of backtrack a little, because we were talking about your time at Vote Leave, and we're talking about what happened after you blew the whistle. Would you mind just giving any of our listeners who aren't aware of exactly what happened a sort of brief synopsis of what happened with Vote Leave, the illegality, the way in which you blew the whistle, and the outcome of that, if that's okay, Shahmir?
Yeah. So when I first started working for Vote Leave, I was a volunteer, just coming on because I needed work experience within politics. I was no idea what the hell I was getting into, frankly speaking. And I was 21 going, I'm not getting any work. I'm broke. Let me find some experience. And so I was introduced to, I reached out to a few friends that I knew that had worked within politics, and I said, can you introduce me to anyone? They were like, oh yeah, this person. Anyway, I was introduced to Stephen Parkinson, who at the time was national organizer for Vote Leave.
Yeah.
And then after that became the political advisor to Theresa May, and then is now in the House of Lords. I talked to them in the Vote Leave office.
A nice reward for outing you.
Oh yeah. So I interviewed with them, and I told them how I just sort of went. They basically looked at me and said, oh, he's brown, he's Muslim, and he's not an idiot, so let's give him a volunteer role. And so I started working on Black and ethnic minority outreach for the Vote Leave campaign, which is me just engaging with progressives and Black and ethnic minorities. I wasn't engaging with like virulent UKIPers. I absolutely was not anywhere near them. So I was in my own bubble within the Vote Leave kind of outreach teams. And then eventually Vote Leave set up a number of outreach groups to target specific demographics. And they deliberately did this, so one, so that they could engage with as many different communities as possible, but two, so that they could get designation from the Electoral Commission, so that they could show the Electoral Commission, yes, where we should be the official Leave campaign, because all the Leave campaigns were competing to become the official campaign sometime in March 2016.
Yeah.
And so they basically showed, look, we're engaging with all of these people. We're engaging with Muslims, Asians, veterans. They had all of these different outreach groups.
We're the good guys.
Yeah. They were basically saying that, they were saying we're not like the racist grassroots out or, Leave EU, we're for the whole of the country. And they won designation for that. One of the groups, these outreach groups that they created was called Believe. Another was called Veterans for Britain. And on Believe, there was another volunteer, just like me, called Darren Grimes, who was working on this separate outreach group, which was specifically going after the demographic of young liberal progressives. I was moved from Black and ethnic minority outreach for Vote Leave as a whole to actually working on the Believe outreach group specifically, because me and Darren had the same political views. We were liberal. We were left wing at the time.
Yeah.
In his case,
well, he was a ex Lib Dem activist, I think, wasn't he?
We were both extremely we were both progressives, and we would talk about things like white privilege and classism and all of these sort of things that I still talk about. So we kind of immediately bonded over the fact that, okay, let's find progressive reasons to want to vote Leave. And so we created graphics that said, why do we need agreement from 27 other member states to get rid of the tampon tax? Feminist policies, so feminist arguments for leaving the European Union. We talked about passport discrimination and why are we discriminating against Nigerian and Pakistani immigrants in preference for European, French, and German immigrants. It's unjust. It's unfair. So that's the work that we were doing, that the Believe Outreach Group was doing for Vote Leave. And we had a few thousand followers. It was a totally digital campaign, but our content was doing extremely well. Our content was being engaged with. Both Darren and I think everyone within the Vote Leave team realized that we were actually very competent, and we kind of were good at messaging and good at strategy and good at graphic design. And so one thing led to another, and Vote Leave told us actually they can give us loads of money if we create ourselves as a separate campaign. And so they had our lawyers, the lawyers of Vote Leave told myself and Darren Grimes that actually the only way for you to get money is if you create yourself as a separate campaign group. And keep in mind that at this time, we were still working for Vote Leave. We're still Vote Leave volunteers. Right. So we go through all the legal documents and stuff. We sign up for the Electoral Commission and the ICO. The lawyer and the Vote Leave staff are guiding us through this entire process. And
because you're 21, what do you know about electoral law?
Exactly. So, all of the same people that were guiding us through this whole process are now working in Downing Street. Are now advisors to the prime ministers, cabinet ministers, and the prime minister. And Believe becomes a separate campaign group by the time of April. And then we're told that actually we can get £750,000 for our campaign.
But there was a caveat to that, right?
Yeah. They said you can only get it if you give it straight to Aggregate IQ, which is a Canadian offshoot of Cambridge Analytica, which Vote Leave had hired to do all of their online advertising. And AIQ was based in the Vote Leave office. So all of this is going on within the Vote Leave offices. Essentially all of that was illegal, right? So you can't have two separate campaigns coordinating and then also separating their finances. That's entirely illegal. Yeah. It's wrong. It's unethical. It's undemocratic. It defeats the entire purpose of British democracy. Is create as many separate campaign groups and give them that money, because what British electoral during the referendum you weren't allowed to spend more than £7 million. Every campaign had a limit of £7 million. Yeah. And so all the extra money that they had to give away to other campaigns that they weren't working with, or donate it, so to speak. And so Vote Leave essentially figured out that they could circumvent those spending limits by actually creating campaigns from within Vote Leave and presenting them as separate campaigns, putting other people's names on their official documents, and then getting them to hire the same firm that they were using. And so, the Electoral Commission found Vote Leave guilty for essentially committing electoral fraud, and this it's all done and dusted. It's kind of like the sort of case of their electoral law being broken was closed.
Because they didn't take up their opportunity to appeal last year, right? March or May last year.
They didn't. They're totally just sort of went, okay, fine, whatever, we'll accept.
And paid their fine.
Yeah, they'll pay the fine, obviously, because their big millionaire donors don't want to be caught out in a bigger scandal. So they just said, okay, what's 60K? What's 90K to us?
Well, that's it, and it's something very similar to what we touched on with regards to your case with Taxpayer Alliance. That it's much easier for them to say, no, we done all of that. That's us. We get fined. We were bad, and them not looking deeper into it, because the very real danger is when they start looking into it, they start discovering other questionable finances and other donations that shouldn't have happened and other things that just then snowball out of control. So in this case, they were caught, they knew the parameters with which they were caught, and they just kind of accepted that and paid the fine so it would go away.
Yeah, I was just saying that this is the fundamental, this is what's rotten about the British democratic system, right? It's what's essentially rotten about this country, is that no matter what you do to pervert democracy, there's no criminal ramifications for it. You'll get slapped a fine and that's it. There's no actual further deeper investigations, because it's like, that's all we can do. You can still have your campaign. Yeah, sure, you cheated. Yeah, sure, you cheated to win the race, and we're not going to take the medal away from you. You can keep the medal. Just don't do it again. Actually,
yeah, and you have a kind of toothless organisation to a certain extent in the Electoral Commission. Their powers are limited. You also now have a government in power. Dominic Cummings, who was one of the chief guys behind Vote Leave, is advisor to the Prime Minister of the country. So there's not going to be any appetite in Downing Street to investigate it further. People like Matthew Elliott, who you mentioned earlier, he was the chief executive of Vote Leave. He then became the chief executive of Taxpayers Alliance. You have, as was detailed in your legal papers, in your legal case with Taxpayers Alliance, you've got these 9 entities working out of 55 Tufton Street, all of whom are very much aligned with the current government doctrine, right? Just for the information of our listeners, I'm going to list them if that's okay. You've got Taxpayers Alliance, you've got Civitas, Leave Means Leave, the Adam Smith Institute, the Global Warming Policy Foundation, Brexit Central, the Centre for Policy Studies, and the Institute for Economic Affairs. And when you were there working in amongst that, Shahmir, is it fair to say that these groups are working in unison with each other? There's a large amount of collaboration between them all.
The way that I explain it is that they are all friends with each other. They have meetings, coordinated meetings. I think they've stopped doing them now because ever since this happened. But there is an alignment of strategy. There's every single person that works for all these different organizations is connected to each other, not just the fact that they're politically aligned, but because they work in each other's offices, they drink with each other, they fuck each other, and I mean that really seriously. I'm like, these people are not separate entities, and these people aren't separated from each other. There is a sort of essentially a coordinated community that is working with the Conservative Party and working with Downing Street in order to get their messaging exactly the same and to ensure that as many people are subjected to that message as possible. And it's crazy to me that these firms are still being treated as or these companies are still being treated as worthy of a platform or any kind of attention, especially considering that they have the Taxpayers Alliance conceded to firing someone because of their belief in the sanctity of democracy. And I quote, these people, they admitted to coordinating with Downing Street to defame me. And this is why when I talk about this, like I always have to kind of take it on a macro level and be like, this was the biggest breach of campaign finance law in British history, in the biggest known breach of campaign finance law in British history. One, there was a coordinated campaign by the most influential policy groups and research groups that are the ones advising the government of the government of the United Kingdom on what policies to go for and what decisions to make and who to give money to and who not to give money to and who to save and who not to save and which country to bomb and which country not to bomb. There was a coordinated effort by these individuals and groups to bury a story and bury information, bury evidence of the single biggest breach of electoral law in British history, and known. And I say known because I'm sure there's been more. And I repeat it again and again because I kind of have to tell myself as well, because I kind of go, it's not that big a deal because obviously it didn't have that kind of impact. And I realize I have to remind myself that actually my role is done. I did my part. I blew the whistle and I gave the British public and the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party and the entire opposition, everyone, the ammunition that they needed to take this as far as they could, including campaigns like People's Vote and Best Forbidden, whoever. And they chose not to use that. And that's why I've sort of gone, I don't see any kind of real change on electoral laws or there being actual ramifications for people that pervert democracy, because all of these people are still in the same circles. I've had conflicts with people like the People's Vote, where I've sort of gone, what the fuck are you guys doing? And they've just sort of been like, oh, this isn't the right time. And I've kind of gone, right, so you're literally just playing politics with this. And it's bigger than that. This is about the perversion of democracy. Take it to the macro level, take it to the bigger level. Like it's bigger than just your own like back and forth about leave and remain.
Yeah.
And I struggle to kind of reiterate that to people, and I always remind them to go back to literally the words that these people have admitted to. They've admitted to breaking the law. They've admitted to cheating. They've admitted to coordinating a disinformation campaign. They've admitted to lying. So how are you still fighting for them or caping for them? Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, see, I personally find that this happening, knowing your story for quite some time and stuff, and like, so I know the ins and outs of what happened and seen it kind of unfolding, and the information that you get, but some other people as well have brought over the last few years regarding certain people who are currently now in charge, like maybe not just in charge of Westminster, but hold some of the highest positions of power in this entire country. Like, I find that this happening. So for you, on top of knowing all of this, but also had to go through all of the awful that we spoke about, being attacked left, right and centre for essentially them stripping down every component of you and peeling you apart, you must find that, well, you must lose faith in democracy in this country because I mean, what more could you do? You literally produced evidence and got them to admit that they were in the wrong and colluding, but still,
nothing happened.
Those people are still getting 6-figure, 7-figure salaries at the top end of British government, advising the British government, and we are still discussing it right now, 4 years later. But the people who could push for it are not pushing hard enough as they should be.
Yeah. And now not only are they in charge of Brexit, but they're in charge of have a massive global pandemic in our reaction to it, which I guess kind of brings us on to the next question, which would be, having been around these people and being subject to their kind of ethos, to their political beliefs. I've seen some of your writings about, being in social situations, and I'm talking about how, the NHS should be privatised, that anything which has anything which is state funded is necessarily bad. There's a large level of indoctrination, it would appear, within these kind of groups. They have the right wing beliefs and they repeat them to each other, and that's kind of the general basis that their entire ethos is founded on. So how does that knowledge and that sort of insight into their inner workings, how does that inform your perception of government policy throughout this pandemic?
I think with the current crisis, it's everyone's sort of like, everyone feels like, what the fuck is going on? Like, this is, and everyone keeps saying like, we don't understand, like, it's chaos, it's crazy. Like, how is this happening? And everyone's has this weird kind of churning in their brain going like, what the fuck is going on? I always kind of try to go back to who these people are and how they work. And I kind of go, there are these people who have been voted in to be members of parliament. They have their teams under them that are all from the same universities, that have worked from being activists up to joining research teams of lobby groups, or some of them have gone into comms, and then they just do work on different local, national campaigns here and there. And they've just live their 10, 15 years within Westminster, working in different sectors, from the media to consultancy to political campaigns, or to work under cabinet ministers, and then eventually they become advisors to cabinet ministers and the prime minister. And it's this kind of small circle of people that are just jerking each other off, going through a revolving door within all these different spaces, from like the BBC to Downing Street to then all of these think tanks and lobby groups that are here, and then sometimes the civil service, right? Sometimes, even though they all hate the civil service, and the conservative establishment specifically. And I've sort of have to remind people, I always ask people to remind themselves that these people aren't geniuses. They're actually incredibly incompetent. They're incredibly incompetent, but what they're good at is politics. What they're good at is knowing how to get on the media and how to speak to someone on the news so that it actually disseminates among the public. That's their job. That's what they're trained to do their whole lives. They're not trained in nuance. They're not trained in human beings or understanding individuals or communities. They're totally trained in essentially what is propaganda, right? I mean, you can't.
Strong and stable, get Brexit done, stable, stay safe, protect the NHS, that kind of stuff.
There's no compassion. There's repeating these mantras over and over again and making sure to get that message out.
Yeah, they're not doing it for us. In fact, they're actually doing it for themselves. Like, this is what even working within this space, they will repeat. They don't just say strong and stable on TV. They don't say it just on television. They will be having drinks with each other and saying this stuff in the most serious way. Like, they would like having a drink.
That must be a brutal social surrounding.
But you're absolutely. It's interesting. It's important you pointed that out, because what I also fundamentally, these are people that are socially inept, social recluses, don't know how to engage with anyone outside of Etonian Westminster politics, genuinely do not have friends outside of this space that they work in. And so their world is not everything that they see on TV, news, whatnot. They have no access to it. They only have access to this world of politics, which has always been reserved for the upper echelons of British society, right? The wealthy. And then you have their advisors that are telling them which policies to go for, who are getting their information from lobby groups, who are writing research papers based on the request of millionaire donors to the party. And so it's not, it seems complex, but it's not actually that complex. It's just, a bunch of boys just hoo-ha-hooing through life and just happening.
Yeah, and have probably known each other from their early days and stuff as well. Like, they went to school with each other.
Their parents know each other. Yeah. Their cousins know each other. This is why I keep saying they're not just these cabinet ministers and politicians. They're not just working together. They're friends with each other. They're fucking each other. They're drinking with each other. They're married to each other. They're some person's son, father, uncle, and it's not just Downing Street, and it's not just vote leave. It's There's a reason why the BBC comms director is always going to Downing Street and vice versa, or why these media establishment people, the sort of creme de la creme of the media establishment and of the political establishment are all dating or friends or family friends, or, you know, this person connected with this person. It's this incredibly small network of people that, specifically regarding Brexit, specifically regarding my personal experience, saw someone that came in and said, I'm in it, I saw it, here's what happened, here's what's happening, and immediately, viscerally, violently rejected that, because it was like, there's nothing we can actually go against him because he's straight from here. He's straight from that same space. So let's go after, you know, integrity, or let's go after, or what the fuck does he know? He's a packy. Like, he couldn't possibly know anything. And that sentiment was not just shared among the conservative establishment, it was shared among most of the political establishment, because they could not believe that this level of kind of honesty was put up for the public to see themselves. And so it's, you know, it's a double-edged sword. There's no way of people within the political establishment actually seeing it or working against it, because it's an expose on themselves as well. I don't know if that's making sense. Or...
No, it is, because I guess, like, for hearing you explain it, my perception is that if you're kind of within that, if that's your experience, if that's your life, and you don't really know any better, then for someone to then reflect it back at you and explain it as an outsider, there's got to be a level of cognitive dissonance from the individual then, you know, going, well, that's not how it is. I'm here on merit.
A criminal doesn't think he's a criminal, right? An abuser does not think an abuser. Victims of abuse become abusers, and they don't know that they are the abuser, right? Human beings are complex and nuanced, and it is difficult for anyone to see themselves as the antagonist, right? Everyone sees themselves as a protagonist. Boris Johnson himself thinks he's a saint, right? He thinks that he is doing the right thing for the British people. He does. There's no denying that.
Yeah, he genuinely believes that.
But that belief is the important part is seeing what those beliefs are motivated by, what the bedrock of that is, and have these people unlearn their own biases and their own inherent negative value or sort of detrimental values that harm other people. And I always sort of go, fuck everything else. Is what you're doing helping people or harming people? Don't think about what it means in your heart. Is what you are doing helping them or harming them? And oftentimes, just approaching something from the perspective of, is what I'm doing beneficial to this, helping this person, not whether I feel it's helping, whether they're actually getting happier, getting better because of the decisions that I'm making. And the answer usually with these people is no. But they will never admit to it. You can't admit to it. We don't admit to it either. But I'm fortunate enough to have gone through that experience of where I had to go to myself, fuck me, I'm an idiot for wanting to vote leave. You know, I had to humble myself, and I've understood that actually humility is actually the most effective and only way for getting these people to realize what they're doing isn't necessarily good for the people around them. Or anyway, yeah.
Well, another thing you touched on there was that this isn't like, I mean, I know it seems obvious to say, but a lot of people miss this sometimes. This isn't solely a conservative thing. This is a upper politics across the entire board. Yes, there are politicians. Yes, a class thing. Yeah, but so and everyone who's at the top end of, well, not everyone, that's not fair. I actually retract that. That was going to be a ridiculous statement. Lots of people who are at the top end of politics in Westminster across the board are there with this kind of mindset, this society thing that they've grown up with, this way where they don't, well, we've spoke about it before, and I would imagine you possibly agree. One of the things that's always perceived is the attitude of things like the BBC and the way that they present things. But if all of them have all went to the same universities and come from the same background and the same social standing, they're not. The problem is the fact that there is no class diversity in the media, like at the top end of the media, and the same as with politics. There's no class diversity. So all the people who are there are all fighting or telling a story or perceiving a thing in a certain way, but it's only because they have this limited view of the world. And I think it's very important that we always remember that this isn't, I know it's easy to make it a conservative thing sometimes because it is, but it's certainly not the case.
Not.
So, I mean, and talking about the BBC, you know, when you see representatives from the likes of the Taxpayers Alliance or the IEA or these think tanks appearing on sort of flagship political shows like Newsnight, like Question Time, without any sort of explanation as to where their funding comes from and who they represent. Like, what's your opinion on that? How do you kind of process that in your mind? And is there anything that we can do to sort of prevent that sort of stuff from happening?
Yeah, part of me wants to. Like, I've always bashed the BBC purely because of my own personal experiences with the BBC, you know, but I've met some of the most incredible people that I know from the BBC, right? And, you know,
I'd like to say we're not like heavy critics of the BBC. We see a lot of good in what they do, you know, but it's you have to be balanced, yeah.
But yeah, like I said, we're under no illusion, and pretty much exactly what I just touched on there, we're under no illusion that there is no class representation, like diversity, other than the upper echelons, and as such, you get not everyone is intentionally being they just don't know any better. So, but yeah, I mean, there's many components of the BBC we've certainly pulled apart in numerous episodes before. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, so how do you feel about?
Cutting off your flow there.
I think this is something that a lot of people within the BBC are trying to figure out themselves, is how do we get rid of that class divide? And I've spoken to some pretty some people working within the BBC about what work they're doing, and it's this constant battle that is permeating every organization in this country, period. And that is, how do we create a more inclusive and sort of nuanced, diverse workforce and product? You know, it's rooted in understanding how your organization inherently is classist, racist, purely because of the mechanics you have in play that allow people to move within that workplace, but also the kind of environment that space creates. Someone from a working class background from the North, you know, wouldn't fit well in the BBC, even if they had, you know, the experience in their belt, because they wouldn't be able to navigate the kind of culture of that company. You can't. If you're from like, you know, Uganda, and if you're from Uganda or whoever, or you're British and you're Pakistani, or you're British and you're Nigerian, and you're in this space which is so white and so middle class, you can't work in that space irregardless. And so it starts from a bedrock shift in the kind of culture that they kind of have. And I think with the BBC specifically, my critiques have always been of BBC News specifically. And BBC News, the department of BBC News has actually been incredibly violent towards me. You know, I've had 4 press releases. 3, I could be wrong. It's like 3 or 4 press releases from the BBC News press team, basically just saying I'm chatting shit. And I'm just like, I mean, I'm humbled and that you think that I'm important enough to actually like write a press release, but why the fuck are you writing a press release saying that what I'm saying is untrue? You know, what's the point? Like, I am not important enough or don't have a voice loud enough for you to care, but you're still responding to it because I'm like, what I'm saying hits a fucking nerve. It's personal because everything that's going on in there is personal. These people are within these teams. They are friends with these politicians. They are friends and colleagues and drinking buddies with the people that they are questioning and critiquing and criticize and platforming. And there's this again, this is why I keep saying is that they're drinking with each other, they're fucking each other, they're doing all this shit with each other. Like they're inviting each other's to their homes, like BBC journalists are inviting Guido journalists to their homes. Like why? And people often say, okay, you can have personal relationships. Yeah, sure you can. But when these people are involved in electoral crimes, when these people are involved in the perversion of democracy, when these people are involved in lying and deceiving the public and stoking fear and stoking hatred, that's when I'm sort of like, right, get your shit together. And
because it's your job to hold them to account.
Yeah, but it's difficult to hold your friends to account in a public setting, right?
Yeah,
like
it's also if you advertise them as a think tank that you're discussing on the BBC News instead of a lobbyist, then it makes things much easier, because it's much easier to have a think tank come in and discuss how they feel about global warming than it is to have lobbyists who are against certain policies already. So that's another way that I believe we have to get the BBC to change, and not just the BBC, all media across the board, but especially the BBC, because they do sell that.
I think there needs to be a national campaign in support of the BBC. It's surprising coming from my mouth, but even when I was working within the Taxpayers Alliance, the one thing they hated more than public healthcare and socialism was the BBC.
The BBC.
They, as much as we kind of talk about, most people on the left, whatever, progressives, if you're even a centrist, whoever, moderates, we say, the BBC is fucked up for doing all of this shit. But we also understand that actually there's nuance to this, because we have the privilege of having the intellectual vitality to see that these things are complex, and that in itself is a blind spot, right? It's the ability that we can see that this is more than just everyone in the BBC is evil, whereas the other side is sort of going, actually, everyone in the BBC is evil, everyone in the BBC is a Remainer, and all of this bullshit. And actually I think
while being given a platform by them.
And I think actually my approach has been to critique people like Robbie Gibb or I forget his name, the editor of the producer of BBC Question Time, Rob Burley, whoever. These people have despise me. They genuinely despise me, and I don't understand why, because I've never actually said anything outside of what's been proven in the courts or in legal cases. And I think
I was going to say, so you should actually be the face of the pro BBC movement, because nothing would irk them more than
I used to be called wet and a communist and a socialist for saying things like, I like the BBC. I think there should be a national public broadcaster, while I was working for the Taxpayers Alliance. So for me to go from that to being like, man, these people are fucked up. To see them, the same people that I protected, be violent towards me for holding them to account has been quite a very kind of confusing headspace to be in. But I still go, the BBC as an institution needs to be protected. I think BBC News needs to have BBC News needs to fire everyone that's in their senior positions and hire people that are actually from different backgrounds and working class backgrounds and are actually opinionated, so that there is this like group debate within BBC News, rather than all of them being from the same circle,
agreeing with each other,
and being like, okay, let's put this guy from wherever, from this right-wing neo-Nazi journalist to come through because I like the way he talks about Brexit. It's like
So, like, when you were within that environment, and did you feel like an outsider at the time, or did you kind of feel like you belonged? How was it? How was it for you?
no brown person feels like they belong there. Period.
So yeah. So do you think that made it easier for you, perhaps, to kind of make the decision to blow the whistle because you maybe didn't feel like you belonged in that setting?
I think yes. I think partly yes. I think I always, but I also think the reason why I was able to kind of not get lost in the conservative groupthink, as all of my other younger peers, Dan Grimes and all of them lot, and all of the younger politicos, is because actually so many of these people. So a lot of these people that are young, specifically young Tories, they come into this space and they're suddenly meeting Boris Johnson, all these people they see on TV, and they're going to these parties and these drink sessions with like people who they've seen on TV their whole lives. There's this proximity to fame that a lot of these young politicos experience. And there's this kind of like almost idolization of these people who they perceive as being so successful and so smart and so rich and posh and privileged, and it's this kind of like real life celebrity that they're like associated with, and they kind of get lost in that circle of media personalities and whatnot, and politicians. And I had the privilege of actually, my privilege was that I was from Karachi, Pakistan, and I've actually had a pretty lucky experiences by working to get to New York for work experience, and over the summer holidays when I used to live in Pakistan and when I was in the UK, and meeting people that are much more famous and much more successful than the people that I was meeting within Westminster. And I think that it was like a two-way thing, where that's why they found me endearing as well, which is because someone like me, who's even then was very progressive and would talk about things like white supremacy and privilege. But I also kind of fulfilled this fantasy of like someone from the Indian Raj, because I was like an intellectual and eloquent. And so that allowed me to kind of see them on my level rather than sort of putting them on this pedestal. I didn't see Dominic Cummings or Boris Johnson as these heroes of mine, or these really cool, incredible, successful people that I wanted to emulate. I saw them as being on my kind, like I could have a conversation with these people. Like I understood where they were coming from. I didn't idolize them. And so it wasn't that hard for me to go, these people aren't perfect.
The exact opposite. Yeah. Like these people are fucking idiots. Yeah, exactly. And I've been surrounded with them. Yeah.
Right, so let's just do a quick kind of discussion about some of the people that you met and stuff, and what they were like. So Dominic Cummings, first of all, what was your kind of opinion? What's your synopsis on Dominic Cummings as a individual?
I think he is. I mean, let me explain Dominic Cummings from the perspective of British politics, right? Dominic Cummings is one of the few people that actually reads within British politics. He is an intelligent man. He is an intellect, and he reads books and he reads journals, and he takes an interest in science and data and human psychology and politics and philosophy and all of these things. Dominic Cummings is an intelligent man. And you don't find that within British politics, because most of the people there are just there because they know how to get messaging right, and they've like come through as activists, or hoo-ha their way through the landscape.
Yeah.
And that's precisely why someone like Dominic Cummings is so idolized and not even idolized, worshipped. It's a cult around him. That's the way that I describe it, is that the people around Dominic Cummings are a cult. Like, they obsess over him in a way where I never understood, because I was like, what the fuck is it about this guy that you guys are so obsessed with? Because I was like, I would read his blogs and read his pieces, and I was like, all right, okay, cool, yeah, I get what you're saying, but half of this is just you talking to yourself and stroking your own ego. And so there's this severe lack of knowledge among a lot of these British politicos.
So there's a void to be filled.
And that's why someone like Dominic Cummings, who knows what he's talking about, frankly speaking, he understands the things he says, and he can actually argue to the T to what he's talking about, and but he's also an egomaniac, right? He's, you can just see that in the way that he writes his blogs, and the way that everything is just some like bantamobile, and for me personally, I can't denying Dominic Cummings' intellect would be wrong of me to do that. But it doesn't matter, because he's been held in for all his smarts, he's also incredibly arrogant and also has been held in contempt of Parliament. This is the man that thinks that he's above the law and above parliamentary scrutiny. And it doesn't matter how smart or clever a cookie you are. It doesn't matter what you've done or how successful your previous campaigns have been. If you are someone that does not abide by the law and does not see Parliament does not see yourself, and if you are someone that does not see themselves as being or sees themselves as being above parliamentary scrutiny, then you are a danger to British democracy, and you are a danger to the British public. And there's no way of going around that. Like, if you deny, if you were someone that has been held in contempt of Parliament and then are deciding on public policy and the future of this country, to me it's a mindfuck, right? To me it's like, what the fuck is wrong with you people? Like, what's not clicking? Like, what's not clicking?
Yeah.
But, this is the problem with British politics, is that everyone's so bloody up their own asses that anyone that they can fantasize over becomes a hero. And Dominic Cummings is the person they're all coming over.
Surely there's the chance, though, that if things do go pear-shaped for Boris is ruthless enough in his upbringing in society that he'll just throw Dominic under the bus if he, like, literally £350 million printed on the side, he said, was, he'll just throw Dominic under the bus if he has to, because they all watch their own backs. That's the general sense that I get. Like, they're in this for their own personal gain. There's camaraderie as long as camaraderie works for them. I mean, like, obviously you've got a much greater experience of them than me, but like, they are cutthroat when it comes to their own personal gain. That's the general sense that I get.
I think yes, and also no. I think all of these people within the current Vote Leave government, something I say now is just like Vote Leave government. I refuse to say Conservative government.
We should just call that.
Is that actually their strength is their ideological purity and their ideological extremism. I refer to it as extremism because it is extremism. Being in a room with them and watching them talk about neoliberal ideologies, or free market libertarianism, or capitalism, and the kind of list of bite-sized facts that they constantly reiterate to themselves, to each other. They genuinely
dogmatic.
Yeah,
almost.
They genuinely see themselves as part of a bigger movement, and I think that that's important to understand, is that yes, of course, they all have their personal ambitions, but they also genuinely are extremists in their ideological vision. Their vision is of a Britain that is entirely marketized. It's not even like have a little public service. Genuinely, their fantasy, their dream goal is no public healthcare, no unions, leaving everything to the market. Like even Adam Smith would think that's fucking preposterous, and they love Adam Smith.
Yeah.
But they don't actually read Adam Smith. They don't actually read the journals, or they don't actually read about their so-called greats. Even Ayn Rand, the way they obsess over Ayn Rand is like insane. And I'm just like, they're like, oh yeah, welfare is bad, and I'm just like, Ayn Rand was on welfare like their whole life. Like, what is going on? What's not clicking? And then I just sort of realized that herein lies the problem, is that their ideology is based on a kind of unwritten Bible of sorts that is just a repetition of things like screw the state, communism is bad, socialism is evil, socialism will destroy the world, capitalism is good because it's brought so many people out of poverty. And it's like,
yeah, but it's stuff that's reinforced by everybody around about them, and everything in their sphere is telling them that's correct. There's not a lot of room for dissenting voices potentially.
Yeah, and journalists aren't, in the media particularly, aren't actually able to critique them for that, because they're part of that same world, and so they don't see outside of the ideology. They just see it as, I don't know how to explain it. It's like,
so what do you think? What do you think about, like, for example, Piers Morgan's weird redemption arc that he's going through at the moment, where he's like suddenly questioning the government? How do you perceive that?
So easy. It is so easy to be perceived as a journalist that's holding these people to account when the people you're holding to account are so fucking inept. Like, it's not hard.
Yeah.
It's not hard to be perceived as the bastion of democracy when the people that you're actually holding to account are extremists. Like, it's like saying, oh, this journalist held like ISIS to account. Like, cool.
But there doesn't seem to be very many people doing it, though, right? I mean, like Peter Oborne, about what sort of, it would have been during the election campaign, actually, would have been back in December, was writing for Open Democracy about the sort of cuddly nature of the interaction between, for example, Laura Kuenssberg and the Conservative government, Robert Peston and the Conservative government, and he kind of took Amal Rajan to task on he was filling for Jeremy Vine on Radio 2, and sort of had a go at him for being part of that establishment and part of that sort of bootlicking culture.
Because they want the story, right?
Surely Piers Morgan's in that fortunate situation with himself that there's very little fear that they're going to get rid of his job. I imagine Piers Morgan has information on many of the people involved here that, like, he can hold him to task, because there's very little fear that he's going to get shut down or kicked off or fucking dragged, because I imagine he's accumulated a lot of information on lots of these people, including Boris, over the time that he's been in media, because of the positions he's held.
He wasn't acting this way 6 months ago when we had the general election. I don't know why he's suddenly grown a conscience now. All of a sudden, that's what I'm struggling to understand.
Take away from the harm that he's committed towards people of color and to trans communities and to vulnerable people that he has actively contributed to now what is the normal British opinion on things such as people such as Muslims or trans people. It's like, you're holding the government to account, but the government is awful, and this is your job. Like,
is this just maybe an easy redemption? Like, is this an easy way for redemption? Like, anybody?
This is what you're supposed to be doing. This is your job.
Yeah, but
Like,
I guess our bar's so
Exactly.
fucking low now
It's really low.
that yeah.
It's so low.
So next person I'm going to ask you about then, who you would have had quite a lot of experience of, would be Darren Grimes.
I had a feeling Darren was coming up on this one. We've discussed Darren once or twice, as you probably imagine, when we done our Cambridge Analytica stuff and that. He came up in that whole thing because his name was there, involved in the Leave campaign.
Do you still speak to Darren? Like, are you in contact at all, or is that's gone?
Darren blocked me the day I came forward.
Oh, really? That's quite sad, man.
Yeah, like, before the day before I came forward, I called Darren myself and I said, listen, I'm going to come forward. And because I know, every single interview that I did, every single Channel 4, BBC, everything, I would say again and again, like, Darren Grimes is not the culprit. He is being used as a scapegoat. And sure, there came a point where I was like, right, now you're just entirely complicit because of the bullshit that you're spreading. But I didn't ever want to engage with conversations about Darren Grimes, because I knew that, being from that side, that their strategy would be to make this about Darren, and they did. And so I actually was adamant that actually this isn't about Darren, it's about Darren, it's about Darren. And Darren said a lot of shit about me, and a lot of these people that a lot of people that I haven't even named. Well, I have named them all to the National Crime Agency, but not in a public setting. I didn't refuse to engage with, because I was like, you people have no idea what's going on, and you're so caught up in your own fantasy political world that you will never be able to see it until you're traumatized out of it. And when we were doing, my lawyers, when I had come forward, I kept asking my lawyers to reach out to Darren constantly. I was asking them, reach out, please, reach out. And
you thought it was redeemable, I
thought
guess,
so,
right?
because, man, this guy was like talking about white privilege and it was talking about shit that like most Lib Dems don't even talk about because they're too far on the right. Like, like, he was a progressive, and he was sensible and sentimental, and he would understand. He was nuanced, and when it came to now, he's like talking to people about how there's only two genders, and watching that has been nothing for me. It's been incredibly upsetting. This guy's my best friend at the time. Like, this guy used to be my closest friend, like, before I came forward. And it was I never came forward. A huge part of me coming forward, and I had written this down, was to ensure that Darren wouldn't be the fall guy, even though I knew that was going to be their strategy. And that's precisely why they put his fucking name on the Believe documents. And they did that.
Yeah.
And they turned this into like how Carol and these people are coming after this poor innocent boy. And once Darren started playing into that poor innocent boy bullshit, that's when I was like, okay, I'm separating myself from this. My issue is not Darren. My issue is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The people that I'm going after are not some young kid young adult now who's surrounded by people who are involved in electoral crimes, or is surrounded by people who lied to the British public and deceived the British public about, again, the biggest breach of electoral law in modern British history. So I have to kind of not get lost in the personal when it comes to Darren, because to me, he is a symptomatic of a lot of the British public, who have been radicalized in this almost new age of kind of neoliberal capitalist politics of just talking shit about how there's only two genders, and talking about how the liberal elite and like socialism is evil, like these like bullet points.
Well, I mean, that's even like Darren does it. First and foremost, can I just say I find it very interesting because the persona that I have only ever seen presented from Darren is the one that he has presented as this kind of right-wing activist almost. The idea that that's not his base beliefs, I find amazing because it's never, because I can't perceive that in my head. But following that, exactly what you were saying. Oh yeah, of course. Continue.
Yeah, I was just saying, just to be very clear, this was then. This was 3 years ago. Now he is totally responsible for his actions, and whatever is happening now is his entire responsibility. And the violence that he is spewing with his transphobic bullshit is something that I have no sympathy or empathy for. I think he has gone the other side of this extremist right-wing mentality that is infecting particularly young males, and this kind of obsession with almost alt-right identity of like the cucks and the simps and the threat to traditional male-female roles and all of this alt-right bullshit that I've sort of gone, that's his problem, not mine. And I kind of sort of go, now he's not that person. People change.
Yeah. So from reading some of the court papers and stuff like that from your lawyers and whatever, one thing that interested me was that there's a piece where you kind of talk about, or they spoke about the kind of days leading up to the referendum. Vote Leave had an event. And you guys were asked to kind of wear Vote Leave t-shirts and turn up at this thing. That you and Darren were both maybe not flush with cash at the time, and were asked to pay for the dinner or the lunch or whatever. And there was a little bit of tension. You were uncomfortable with it. Darren said it was okay, but you could tell there was a little bit of sort of warrior tension from him, maybe because financially it was a bit of a squeeze on him, but he told you it would be fine. And this is one of the first things that kind of raised your concern or got you questioning whether all of this was okay. So is there any part of you that questions whether he was aware that there was something dodgy going on? Were you aware that there was something dodgy going on, or was it just that you were just too young, too naive, and you just didn't really click at the time?
I remember that dinner so well because it was, again, the reason why I remember it is because it was so awkward, right? It was so uncomfortable, and we were sitting, it was me, Darren, and everyone of the senior Vote Leave team, every single person. And the bill, I remember the bill, it was like 400 and something pounds. Like, I remember the number, because, and Darren went to me, they're asking me to pay for it. And I was like, what the fuck? I remember going, what the fuck? Why are they making you pay for it? They were like, they'll just take it out of the expenses. And I remember trying to say no. Why are you paying for it? Just say no. You don't have the money, Darren. Because Darren didn't have the money. He was like, well, they're just making me pay for it and this ain't going to expense it. And I think that actually that moment is actually an integral part in the story because that payment is one of the main evidence that was used to hold Vote Leave guilty because they were, the whole illegality is coordination, right? And their argument, Matthew Elliott himself and everyone at Vote Leave that is now in Downing Street that are, and even Matthew Elliott said this on the interview with Laura Koonsberg, is that Darren was never part of Believe. Darren was never part of Vote Leave. This is what they've said in public, and like slandered me and like defamed me on public television for providing this evidence, and only for them to go, "Oh, that was never happened." And I'm like, the receipt is there. The National Crime Agency has pictures of the receipts. It's like, what happens with that investigation? I don't know. But fundamentally, this was what led to Vote Leave being found guilty, right? The reason why Darren Grimes' specific belief thing wasn't investigated further by the Metropolitan Police because it wasn't talking about that, right? The investigation wasn't around that. And so I think that is a very integral moment in the story, actually, of where you see the dynamic that was between us as volunteers and Vote Leave, and how Believe was sort of seen as this entity that was part of Vote Leave but wasn't. I don't know whether it was a deliberate thing. I don't know what it was, because at the time I was just like, all right, this is fucking weird. Cool, whatever, pocket. I didn't think it was.
But there's almost, kind of looking back at it with the benefit of hindsight, it's almost like perhaps a moment of divergence, because you were going, nah, fuck that. Tell him you're not paying for it. Whereas Darren went along with it and did pay for it, and obviously you have both went on very different paths since then. It's interesting to me as an outsider to sort of look at that and look at how things have gone since then. So the third person I want to ask you about, and I think this will be the last question of the interview, because we don't want to keep you all night. Chris Wylie, you mentioned earlier that he's a good friend of yours. Obviously, was an integral part of the kind of whistleblowing efforts against not just the Vote Leave campaign, but the Trump campaign in America, the campaign against SCL Group and Cambridge Analytica, and some of the fantastic journalism which came about off the back of that. So yeah, as a person and professionally and stuff, tell us a little bit about Chris and your friendship with him.
I met Chris. The first interaction me and Chris had was through Grindr.
Right.
And because, I messaged him. I was like, cool hair. I was in London. This was when I was at university. This was years before. This was like 2-3 years before. This was like 2 years before Vote Leave. He was working.
Oh, so this was actually before he were whistleblowing?
Yeah, I knew Chris. Chris is the one that introduced me to Stephen Parkinson at Vote Leave, because they worked together at the Lib Dem coalition. And which is also why when I found all of this shit out, I went to Chris first. And it just so happened that when I went to Chris, I was like, yo, you fucking introduced you. I was like, yo, this is your friend. Look at what's going on. And he was like, okay, I need to show you something. And that's when I found out about what he was talking to Carol. And so actually that was a big part of why Chris is really the reason that I was able to go as far as I did in terms of whistleblowing, because I don't think I'd be able to have blown the whistle if it wasn't for Chris, period. It would have been impossible, because how can a 22-year-old at the time when I blew the whistle, 22? Yeah, 22.
That's crazy, man.
Go against the most powerful people in this country. And when Chris told me that he was working with a journalist, I said to him, yo, so this is happening. Can you help? I want to come forward. And then Chris introduced me to Carol.
I love the idea of that top Trump stickers where you're just like, wait to hear this story. And he's like, oh, you want to hear this story?
Yeah, it was actually, it's so surreal, right? It's so surreal. And I think
Yeah. I mean, like as a film script, two guys who randomly met on Grindr both end up being two of the biggest whistleblowers in recent British political history. Yeah, it's a
story,
sort of random. Yeah, it's a story.
It was a story.
Well, it certainly was, yeah, because we met you backstage not last year, the year before, a couple of years ago at Byline for the first time. Because we're both actually on a whistleblower panel at the time. So it's I had never really thought about your previous history of known each other before, and I know Jerry Shred.
We spoke on Grindr, and then he had to leave because he was going to work in Canada, so he was leaving Canada at the time, and so our friendship was built over Facebook.
Ironically,
how ironic!
We used to chat every day on Facebook, every day, and so he's the person. He's one of the people that I wanted to get involved in politics, and so I was like, "Yo, Chris, I'm broke. Yeah. I'm not getting any jobs. Can you introduce me to someone?" And you worked because I knew he had worked for the Lib Dem coalition. So I was like, "Can you introduce me to someone?" And I was like, "I want to work on the I wouldn't mind working on the referendum campaign." So Chris actually reached out to friends he knew in the Remain campaign and friends he knew in the Leave campaign. And then only Stephen Parkinson replied, and then
the rest is
history.
So what's next for you? What have you got coming up? What have I know you've been writing for Byline Times. In relation to Islamophobia and stuff like that. There's been a couple of articles you've written there, so we'll kind of put those links up for our listeners to have a read of. Is there more of that coming? Is there somewhere that I should direct our listeners to keep up with you other than Twitter, obviously?
My Instagram. No, really, I've been trying to balance, because I'm not, as much as people like to have me up speaking on things, I'm more so I like reading and I like writing and whatnot, but a writer is something I don't want to be. I've been trying to figure out what it is that I want to do for 3 years now. I've been like, when you're thrown off from something that you finally are like, oh, I know I'm good at this. I've trying to figure out what it is that I want to do, while at the same time doing so much that isn't based on my own, personal gain. Like, I've spent so many years, all of my friends are like, stop giving a fuck about the British public and start making some money. And I'm very honest about that. I'm like, maybe it's time for me to actually start making some fucking money and being able to like pay rent rather than,
come up here and do some work for like the Scottish Independence campaign, mate. I'm sure they could use somebody with decent messaging and graphic communication skills.
Yeah, for sure. I'm totally pro-independence. I'm totally pro-independence. We will, by the way.
We put you in touch with some people if you really want to talk to them about it.
The main reason both me and Paul are kind of in favour is just because of the endemic issues in Westminster that just seem unfixable.
They hate Scottish. This is what people don't understand, is that like they genuinely do not like Scotland. The whole idea of Scotland, they don't like it. And this is something that I never understood, because I'm not from, like, I grew up in Pakistan. And so the way they would talk about the Welsh and the Scottish, it's like, you really should seek independence.
Well, there you go. There you go. You heard it. You heard it straight from the horse's mouth.
Exactly.
Here, so,
I don't know if you could do an infographic like that, but get out, run. Yeah.
Well, really, Shahmir, it's been wonderful speaking to you, man. So thanks for taking the time to speak to us. We really appreciate it. And good luck. Good luck in your future, mate.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.